When we look back in history, many of us are baffled at the idea that someone like Adolf Hitler could have risen to power with such widespread popular support of the people. Remember, he was extremely popular among German citizens of the time and even among German scientists. Remember, Berlin was really one of the leading epicenters of scientific achievement of the 1930s and 1940s as well. And so you had scientists and politicians and bureaucrats and people who today would be Nobel Prize winners. In that time, they all supported Adolf Hitler. How did that happen? Well, the answer may surprise you, because the answer begins with political correctness. It is the PC culture that gave rise to Adolf Hitler and supported his expansion of his totalitarian regime and the suppression of critics or anyone who would counter his official narrative. It is political correctness that is really a grave danger to the safety of humanity.
How political correctness is harming America. That is the subject of this evening's.
I'm not interested in being politically correct. I'm not interested in being politically correct. I'm interested in being correct.
Now listen, if you are easily offended, please mute the television right now. I'm not kidding.
Something called
really.
Microaggressions are on the rise
Should
on
American
college
colleges
campuses.
try to protect students from anything? Words, books, even ideas.
You're not entitled to
The
this
very idea
space.
that colleges are trying to bubble wrap people is exactly the wrong thing to do.
At its core, political correctness is a form of socially enforced thought control through language control. It is a clamping down of freedom of expression to force the mass consensus obedience to a given political narrative that conforms to the aims of the global elite or whoever are the elite in that society at the time. In other words, it's a way to enslave the minds of the masses by condemning or shaming anyone who expresses ideas that are counter to the official narratives. And so through the enforcing of political correctness, you can shut down all free speech and thus free association, free thinking, and all the ideas that might go along with a wide diversity of different points of view. Political correctness is, in essence, a demand of uniformity, or what I call cognitive conformity, so that everyone's language and ideas and thoughts and beliefs and cultural attachments, if you will, all conform to a few key mythological ideas that may have no foundation in reality, but are considered real by the narrative of those in power. And thus political correctness is an insidious form of what you might call mandatory mental servitude to an agenda or a set of ideas, usually rooted in falsehoods or mythologies. And this is what we see today. Actually, the rise of political correctness in Western culture today is, in fact, a perfect mirror of political correctness back in the Nazi era. This is what gave rise to tyranny. This is what created a society that became genocidal. It was the enforcement of political correctness that allowed such widespread popular support of Adolf Hitler to be able to carry out these insidious, heinous, anti-human actions against others, against his stated enemies. So political correctness can actually set into motion a series of societal events that lead to an escalation of the language of violence against nonconformists, and we've seen that also in modern day PC language, but then it escalates into acts of actual physical violence against those who disagree with the official narrative. And we see this today as well with the Black Lives Matter inspired shooters, the terrorists, who are shooting, targeting police officers and actually openly talking about targeting police officers, even encouraging it. This is really an extension of the politically correct language enforcement, or the thought police, that have their roots right back in Nazi Germany. Nothing really has changed except the context in which this process of mandatory obedience is now playing out. A great example of this is the University of Houston student named Rohini Sethi. And she made the mistake of posting something on social media. She's saying all lives matter. It's sort of a fundamental, universal human truth. For posting this all lives matter message, this student was not only suspended for, I think, 50 days from the university, she was forced to write a letter of contemplation where she would admit her sins, essentially. She would admit why she was wrong to say all lives matter. And she was required to perform certain types of community service and essentially beg for forgiveness from society for daring to say that all lives matter. Now, this kind of punishment of someone for expressing a simple, fundamental human truth that is in fact inclusive and is welcoming of diversity. The fact that she is now being targeted by this PC culture, it means that we've jumped the shark. We've crossed the threshold, if you will, of sanity. And now the PC culture in America has gone past a tipping point where it had any kind of attachment to reality. And now it is really an insane mob of language police lunatics.
What, are you allergic to peanuts?
Fear of flying was on the list of trigger warnings we sent you.
Who are these people?
We're the victims of your hate speech.
We'll need to secure a safe place for our protesters.
They seem angry.
And here we go with the tone policing.
Acknowledge your white privilege.
So the insanity becomes ever more powerful and ever more totalitarian in its enforcement of its ideas. This is how political correctness expands and becomes more fierce and more aggressive and more violent, and ends up becoming the language of violence and threatening and bullying of others. And today, political correctness is intolerance. So if you really examine the PC culture, you find that those individuals are the most belligerent, are the most inflammatory in terms of their rhetoric, are most often engaged in inciting and encouraging acts of violence or encouraging acts of racism, encouraging intolerance stances. And in fact, rather than welcoming diversity and inclusiveness, they are in fact exclusive. And they demand obedience, not diversity, but rather conformity to their specific accepted ideas that are all essentially delusional. Now, where does this go? If we don't stop it in society, where does it lead us? Well, just look at the history of Nazi Germany as a great example. If you don't stop this, it escalates to the point of eventual genocide. In Hitler's day, you had the brown shirts. The brown shirts were really the PC enforcers of the Nazi era, of the Third Reich. And the brown shirts were angry citizens who were extremely loyal to their cause and who believed that the ends justified the means, that it didn't matter what they did to other citizens as long as they got them all to fall into line and be obedient to their worship of Adolf Hitler. And this is another important point to remember, that the Nazi regime is really an extreme demonstration of socialism. In fact, the word Nazi means National Socialism. It's not a far-right group on the political spectrum. It's actually a combination of government corporate fascism with extreme socialism and centralization of economic power and social power and cultural power into the hands of the few. So language becomes weaponized. This is all by design. It's all engineered. And the words are carefully chosen in the realm of political correctness to weaponize them in such a way as to cause an escalation of violent ideas or violent themes or extreme hatred in the minds of the citizens that they are trying to manipulate. Because it is from this hatred and this chaos that the government is able to demand power, demand obedience, seize power. And again, this is exactly what we saw in the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. Adolf Hitler promised hope and change. Adolf Hitler promised a utopian society. He promised a better life for everyone as long as they worshipped and followed his vision and did his bidding. And then through the control of language, through political correctness of that day, he was able to shut down any opposition to his ideas. So if you weren't with the Nazis, then you were an enemy of the state. and you were imprisoned sometimes, you were silenced, you were fired from your job, you were ostracized by society. Well, what do we see today in modern America? We see people being fired from their jobs, executives being fired or demoted. We see people's social media accounts shut down, like Milo Yiannopoulos, Breitbart.com editor, shut down not because he violated any terms of service, because he didn't, rather because of the content of his ideas, or the color of his ideas, if you will. You know, we come from a society where Martin Luther King said we should judge people by the content of the character, not the color of their skin. And yet now we end up in a society where we are judged by the color of our ideas. So we've entered a very dangerous realm. And history tells us that this usually ends up in extreme bloodshed. If you look at the Nazi regime, for example, it became very quickly apparent to those who opposed Adolf Hitler that you were not going to stop that regime and those crimes against humanity by reasoning with the brown shirts or reasoning with the leaders of the Nazi political party or reasoning with Adolf Hitler. You weren't going to debate this. You weren't going to talk your way into an accord of peace. Rather, it was ultimately decided by mostly the Western world, the Allies, Britain and the United States and others, that the way you stop the language police and the totalitarians and the Nazi regime is to put bullets through the heads of their leaders and destroy their infrastructure, destroy their society, in order to prevent them from being able to expand their crimes against humanity. You really cannot stop fanatics with reason. Usually you end up stopping fanatics with bullets. And so it's going to be very concerning, let's say, to watch where this goes in the United States, where we have this PC culture that has now entered the realm of fanaticism. You might call it progressive fanaticism or liberal fanaticism on so many issues, whether it's gay rights or transgender rights or Black Lives Matter or anti-gun ideas, whatever, you name it, it has reached a level of absolute irrational fanaticism. And sadly, history teaches us that you can never reason with fanatics. You cannot stop their fanaticism. You cannot stop their eventual genocide. You cannot prevent them from becoming totalitarians by talking to them, nor agreeing with them. And so one of the great mistakes that has happened in America over the last 10 to 15 years is that conservatives and libertarians, especially in the political realm, have sought to appease the fanaticism of the PC thought police. They have sought to be more acceptable, if you will, to this class of fanatical leftists that we can really call the tolerati. They cannot be reasoned with because their ideas are not rooted in the real world. They're not rooted in any sort of fundamental philosophy or fundamental human rights. In fact, if you utter a phrase of fundamental human rights like all lives matter, then you are immediately condemned and punished and considered worthy of executing. I mean, that's what it has really come to in America today. There's a point where the sane, rational members of society who believe in fundamental human rights are going to have to exercise their own fundamental right to self-defense. This is what the Allies did in World War II. This is why we fought back. Adolf Hitler fought back the Nazis and in essence reclaimed fundamental freedom for many countries, France, Britain, and eventually the United States, but also Italy and much of Western Europe. It's a big global argument about freedom versus tyranny. And tyranny comes from political correctness. And freedom, in contrast, comes from a culture that accepts a diversity of ideas. In fact, if you don't support the free speech of people with whom you disagree, then you don't believe in free speech at all. And so it is the PC language police, it is the progressives, the fanatics of the progressive left who are in fact the bigots of our modern society. They are the cognitive pushers of intolerance. They cannot stand any opinion or any speech or any words even that disagree with their very limited, stilted, distorted views. And the way colleges are run in America today, they are reinforcing political correctness, and they are reinforcing the idea of mass conformity and intolerance that is shrouded in the language of tolerance and the language of progressivism. But it actually teaches extreme outbursts of violence and hatred toward any person expressing any opinion that you find unacceptable. And this is where we get cry bullies, and this is where we get safe spaces. Generation Snowflake, University of Missouri, the Mizzou cry bullies. This is where they come from. They are in fact fanatically irrational and largely made up of absolute lunatics. And yet they claim to have a monopoly over social justice, over social truth. They claim to be able to invent and apply law as they see fit, overruling established law and order in society in order to achieve their stated goals of social justice, whatever those may be on that given day. And they are a danger to all of us. They are a danger to our freedom. They are a danger to our safety. And perhaps the slogan on the flag of the side that's fighting for humanity will be, all lives matter. That might be the battle cry of one side of a civil war in a future America. And yes, this is important to discuss. It is crucial to be able to have these kinds of conversations. We lose our free speech rights if we fail to exercise them. If we are easily intimidated by the PC thought police, then we in effect surrender to their ideology. We surrender to their demands for obedience. We give up what makes us human. And there are so many contradictions in their demands. They demand diversity. We used to hear that all the time from the progressive left. Demand diversity, which in their book meant people of different skin color all appearing in the same photo. Oh yeah, there's your token black person, and Asian person, Latino person. But real diversity is more than skin deep, isn't it? Real diversity is cognitive diversity. It doesn't matter to me the color of your skin. What matters more is the content of your ideas, your ability to be an innovator, your ability to be creative, your ability to connect the dots and perhaps advance human understanding. So skin color doesn't matter, but real diversity is what, in fact, the PC language police absolutely despise. They cannot stand anyone who has an idea that they did not pre-approve. And this is why people who have great ideas and people who have a much deeper philosophical understanding of human history, human culture, and the potential for humanity's future are selectively targeted and punished and bullied and really professionally destroyed in every way possible. In fact, the only reason that I can even share this information with you, that I can speak in this way with such personal fortitude and determination, is because I have no boss. I cannot be fired. No one else signs my paycheck. I'm not licensed by the state. No one can take anything away from me that I don't volunteer to surrender to them myself. And I do not surrender my freedom of speech. I do not surrender my diversity of thought. I will stand firm in the very fundamental human rights belief that we do have the right to exercise free speech. I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And more importantly, I understand that my belief in them is not even necessary for them to be divine rights. And more importantly, I refuse to allow my life and my thoughts and my words to be dictated by lunatics. And so I reject political correctness in all its forms, and I encourage others to reject PC language police, thought control, social justice warriors, so to speak. Reject it all and stand firm in the fundamental core belief that all lives do matter, and that the diversity of ideas also matters, and that we are here as human beings with consciousness to express our ideas and express our words in order to help move humanity forward. And it's the political correctness warriors who are actually holding humanity back. That must stop. And I hope and pray that we can turn this around without leading to genocide or bloodshed or extreme violence being pushed by the lunatic progressive left. But I'm not entirely convinced that that's the case. If you'd like to help support this video and other videos like this, visit healthrangerstore.com, where everything we sell is laboratory tested for heavy metals and more. You'll find superfoods, storable survival foods, nutritional supplements, and a full line of synthetic chemical-free body soaps, shampoos, and oral care products. Everything we sell is non-GMO, and it's all completely free of chemical sweeteners, artificial colors, hydrogenated oils, and other toxic ingredients that you want to avoid. Find all this and much more at healthrangerstore.com.